Kavinsky is what happens when 80s synths meets nighttime highway energy. And if you want that sound, that dark cinematic neon vibe, let me show you all the elements you'll need to build it from scratch in Ableton and Serum. No vintage gear and no time machine required. Alright, I'll put these down, let's get into it. The key thing to take away from this video is 80s, 80s, 80s. That is how I'm designing my synths. That is inspiring the effects decisions that I'm putting on these sounds, slamming it with a limiter. And first and foremost, this synth sound. Made up of super simple chords with just some extra bass notes thrown in. So it gives it a bit more of a thicker sound overall. So it's kind of like a descending chord pattern. This little kind of B flat here and this major chord really lifts it up into a whole new energy. And these are very basic chords from the get-go. No sus4 over diminished 7th. I've kept relatively simple chords for this one and it's paid off a treat. And while we're talking about these chords, you'll notice the 2nd, 3rd and 4th all start an 8th before the actual beat. So if we shifted these across and just play them normally like a chord progression would play. Starting on the beat, not very Kavinsky. Leave the first as is, chuck the 2nd, 3rd and 4th and 8th over. So we're now starting before the beat. Very Kavinsky now. Alright, let's get into the Serum patch. Simple saw wave. Playing those chords. Nice, we can add an os B, octave up, and a lot of unison. A little bit of noise as well, never hurt. Filter, which gives this whole kind of synth its sound. It is just a low pass filter that's cut off, is linked to our first envelope. So, not really moving, but if we drag the sustain down, we start to get a lot more movement because it's shaping this filter and it's shaping the volume of our sound over time. So, you see this cutoff moving, see this level of the noise moving. And just a drop back on the mix here. Heading on into the effects, remember what I said before, 80s, 80s, 80s. We just have a chorus and a little bit of distortion. Hyperdimension wasn't really around the 80s. I'm kind of being a hypocrite here, but that is just to kind of widen the sound and make it a bit more extravagant. Chorus really shapes it, distortion, throws it up against the wall. And the extra width, and this is down to a lot of detune with this as well. And lastly, a bit of reverb as well. Otherwise it'd be a very dry chord sound. This sound, along with your chord progression, pretty much writes the rest of the track. It does a lot of the heavy lifting. So now when we dive into the bass, you are now able to lift it by just removing the chord notes. So if we mute those, we can now use these notes for our bass. So onto the bass, a combination of low pass filter formant and a pulse waveform. So first, if you can see, this envelope is very much like the chord progression, just sustain dropped it a little bit, and sub, so on sine wave. Introduce the pulse. So it's not as fleshed out as like a square wave or intense as a saw wave. It's kind of that weird middle ground. And once you start throwing that into like formants filtering, definitely gives it its sound. So speaking of saw wave, just to thicken that up a little bit more, and we'll dive into the filter one here, which is the formants. Just like the chords, the cutoff is being moved with this envelope. And the mix is down a lot too. So we're going to use filter 2 as well to give the same sweeping sound of that chord progression, but for the bass. So very extreme on the bass. Also being moved by this envelope. Very basic sound, a little bit thick, but we're going to destroy it now. A lot of compression, OTT. 80s, 80s, 80s. OTT wasn't around in the 80s. I've really thrown out my 80s theme as well. Just the multi-band compression sound. And we're going to throw some chorus and some distortion on it too. You see, that's a lot of distortion too. And last thing before we leave the patch, we're going to change this pitch down range to -12. Because what's next is going to really give it that extra Kavinsky edge. So we've still got our bass progression here, but we've got a few more notes now. We've got this little weird note here, we've got this little weird note here. We're going to jump into envelopes and we're going to do MIDI control. This is our pitch bend automation. You notice some of these notes are ramping all the way down an octave, so just the little subtleties of like the note pitch drop off is really cool. And throwing in an EQ2 to give it some extra emphasis on that low pass sweep. We're just moving a notch on this EQ. So before, like it's there, but we want to overemphasize the ow kind of sound. And of course, this third synth in our Kavinsky track is of course the ARP. This ARP plays a crucial role because if you think about it, this is driving music, so we're meant to have like a fast pace. No, this tempo is really slow. Where are we going to get our speedy elements from? And that is the ARP doing 16th notes. This is the fast element that comes through. There was no Serum magic recipe to this one. I literally typed in ARP into Ableton, and the third result was an instant banger. So I took that and ran with it. You can literally use the chord progression. I'll copy and paste that MIDI here. But we're only going to use 3 notes of this repetition because that works a treat. So we're going to ditch these bass notes. Too low of an octave, so we'll select all that and shift plus up. Bump it up an octave. So now you can feel the track's really starting to have movement because of that 16th fast pace. A quick little tip, re-trigger, you want to set this to a beat because if it's off, the re-trigger, since our chords are shifted an eighth from the beat, so they're not here, they're here, we want it to start on the bar because that just sounds a little bit more pleasing to the ear, especially when you throw in drums behind this. Re-trigger goes to beat and interval 1, which is bar. So this does mean our notes here are just getting a little bit repeated before they start again here, but that's all good, it sounds really cool. And lastly, some EQ to make room for the other elements of the track. Let's crack into the drums and then we'll throw it all together and it should sound, well, you know how it sounds. 4 on the floor pattern, we're going for boxy, 80s inspired sounds. Very straightforward, snare thrown into the mix with this little fade element. So if we didn't have this fade element, they're clashing just a little bit too much, so fade tool will really help that. Gives the kick room to breathe a bit more before the snare dominates it. Next up, we want to have that French Kavinsky sound, so that is a little bit of noise over the top of our snare, giving us white noise, and shaped it with a little bit of EQ, some volume automation, so it doesn't come in at the start, like the snare doesn't come in at the start. It gives that room to the kick, and then a bit of overdrive. Overdrive is very essential. And now this together with the snare. Just a little bit more snap and sizzle on those snare beats. And lastly, a little bit of a snapback effect. If you don't know what this is, it's a little reversed element right before the initial kind of downbeat transient. So I'll play this for you. That kind of sound. And if we subtly do that right before every kick and snare, not going to really hear it now, but when we throw it into our processing rack and throw a whole bunch of like distortion and compression against it, this little reverse snapback effect suddenly gets boosted in volume because of all that compression, and you can start to hear it a bit more. But it just gives it character, which is what we're after. Very straightforward, little EQ boost, saturation, compression, easy. Unsolo everything and I mean, it's nice, but it's missing a shrieking, shredding guitar solo like many of Kavinsky's tunes. So with that being said, big banger. Quite a lot of these techniques are actually pretty similar to the Justice style video I did recently. So if you haven't seen that yet, check that out. And yeah, I'll see you over there.